Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. We are talking national news of the day, and we're going to talk tonight about the topic we couldn't get to last week because there just wasn't enough time. Guns. Guns are a big issue right now. Unfortunately, we've had yet another mass shooting. This time in a 4th of July parade celebration in a suburb of Chicago, and this was yet another one where it was the gun was legally obtained by a young man who had a history of social media violence, a lot of discussion about whether or not it could have been prevented, and of course, Mitch McConnell talking about, oh, we need to improve mental health, our mental health system. No argument there, but of course, mental health is a constant across the world. We're the only one who seems to have mass shootings every week, and actually, we have mass shootings every day. And you've got politicians like Boebert down over in Colorado saying that, well, Denmark just had a shooting of 3 people. That proves that gun control doesn't do anything, because Denmark, of course, has much tighter gun control. And I think somebody pointed out in her response to her tweet that there are maybe like just over 100 total homicides of any kind in Denmark for the year, and Colorado alone has already exceeded that in gun deaths or something like that. So it's just that Colorado is where she's from. So we're at this point where again people are demanding something. We did pass this bill. We'll talk a little bit about what's in it. Congress has passed it. It's not enough. It has a red flag law, and it will look a little bit closer at people his age, but I don't think it would have stopped this guy from getting his AR-15. If it was following the laws of the community he was in, it would have, but he went to another community where, the laws were more lax. And, we'll talk about this ruling in New York where, this Supreme Court, which is so concerned about states' rights when it comes to wanting to enslave women for 9 months and, wanting to basically keep us from being able to preserve, to prevent climate change, has no concern for states' rights when it comes to being able to, put any kind of control on guns, and basically overruled a concealed weapons regulation in New York City, ruling that pretty much any type of regulation is a violation of the Second Amendment. So, Dave, where do you want to start?
I think it's easiest. I say easiest. I think we should start with what happened in Highland Park, only because
Sure.
It's going to reveal a little bit about the complexities involved. I think when we're talking about gun safety, I've done a couple shows on it. We've talked about it. It's complicated, and it's really difficult for people to hear information that they don't sort of inherently viscerally support. So it makes it hard. I do think there's a common ground when it comes to, research shows there's common ground, conversations that we could be having, but we're in an emotional rut right now where these mass killings have been so frequent and disheartening and discouraging that people that want a response, a legislative response, are their heart feels ripped open, and they're just saying, like, let's do something. So we'll talk about what Congress did and didn't do. But also there's folks who say, look, you guys don't understand, this is our culture, and you want to throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing. So I get that there's different perspectives on this, but let's look at this one because I think it's interesting. So this person, he had basically what's called an assault rifle. Doesn't matter what kind. They're calling it an AR-15 style. It just means that it's the people don't want military weapons in the streets, and so this is one of those types of weapons. He emptied 2 30-round magazines and loaded shot a total of 83 times. Killed 6 people, injured many dozens. So it was lots of carnage, awful tragedy, hard stop. He ran away. He drove to Madison, Wisconsin with another gun. He was going to do it again, but he realized that he didn't do enough recon or whatever. So he kind of just drove back to North Chicago, where they were looking for him because they knew he was in his mother's car. They picked him up. He ran. He stopped. And apparently, according to the most recent data news report that I heard, he's already basically said, yeah, of course, I did it. Like, I did it,
Right.
it. So he's already admitted it. But that's just like on the surface. I think it's pretty interesting. I'm just going to dive right into it. I hope you don't mind. This guy had a record of he had a knife collection. The police were at his house because he either attempted or threatened to attempt suicide. His dad kind of covered and said, actually, they're my knives. So the police took the guns back. There was no formal mental health evaluation, but the local police did report it to the state police as a person who was a threat to themselves or others. So that there was that first kind of hint at this. But then he also had a second incident, second mental health incident. These were both in 2019, one in April, one in September, where this is when he told people he was going to kill everyone in his family. The police were called out. Doesn't appear that much happened. They confessed that, he never entered the mental health system. There was no real formal reporting that made it up to the level of the transaction inquiry program, the firearms transaction inquiry program. So when he applied to get weapons in June of 2020 and September of 2021, he was able to purchase lots of stuff, a couple rifles, some handguns, etc. So when you talk to the local police there in his community, they say, well, he had no prior criminal record, and he was involved in a non-criminal activity as a juvenile. I think it had to do with having tobacco or something like that. But the chief of police on the record said, we literally have nothing on him. He was not potentially involved in anything, basically on their radar. Even the mayor was a Cub Scout leader who said, hey, he was in my Cub Scout group, and I see that person. Right. I see a boy. And even he lived in an apartment behind a house owned by his father, where his uncle lived, and his uncle was saying, like, I didn't see him do anything particularly wrong.
There was some.
I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there now. So there's this background of, like, if you do a legal background check, he passed all the parameters, but. Now, this is the thing that people are but what you were leading to. I'm sorry that
no, that's fine.
To get there. This guy was, his own friends said he was not identifiably political, but he was disturbed. He was losing touch with reality, and so how did that manifest itself? Like, why would his friends say that about him? Because he was prolifically posted on social media. He was a musical performer who posted violent imagery with mass shooting fantasies. He had a YouTube channel. He was a rapper, amateur rapper, under the pseudonym Awake the Rapper, and he had animated gun violence scenes. One of his videos was called Are You Awake?, with a cartoon animation stick figure resembling himself, wearing tactical gear, carrying out a gun attack with a rifle. And one of the lyrics is, I need to just do it. It is my destiny. And he had another one where he was on the ground in a pool of blood with the police all around him. So he's having these visions, these definitely issues, right? That if there was some red flag law, if his family wasn't sort of like gonna be the ones to do it, this raises the questions: who would be the ones to do it? YouTube and Spotify have said they removed his content, but the news, I was looking at CNN, and they said they've also contacted Apple Music, Amazon Music, Tidal, and Pandora to see if they were going to pull down his content, which I'm sure they've done, or if it was there by now, certainly. Right. But here's this other twist to this. Before I really thought it was important to figure out how complicated this is. There are also pictures on social media where he's at Trump MAGA rallies, wearing a Waldo costume and wearing a MAGA cape. So he's sort of this theatrical acting out within a population of folks where, even if he's not political, that was a political rally. So there's some element of the complexity of the situation where he felt like that was a set of folks who he ought to be, surrounding himself with or in touch with or communicating with, some performance art element. So this is all really, really super complicated, especially because you and I are typically talking about the dry things like the legislative process and the Supreme Court rulings and how do we solve these problems sort of writ large. I brought all this attention and nuance out because I think it's important where would this, if you say to yourself, well, how would we have a more rigid background check? What would it have caught? Or how would we have a red flag law? Or would we want Big Brother to be combing through our social media and some minority report type predictive software AI? Do we want AI being the ones who flag us? Because this guy would have got flagged, but who knows how many of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of other people have something out there that an AI might say, hey, this is kind of a risk. So I think we're in this dystopian place where people are ready to say, you know what, I think social media better help us find this. I say social media, I mean big tech. I think people are thinking big tech ought to help us. But when you go there, when you start talking about predictive behavioral type things, it's going to be very controversial. And if you talk about it in 2022 or 2024, I think we're going to see where this goes. And it's going to be probably towards a direction of people who want privacy, people who want liberty, and not people who want to more rigidly reinforce gun legislation.
I mean, what would happen, though, is when we're thinking about it, is the decision wouldn't be final based on social media. What it would do is it would stop it at that point, that you couldn't buy the gun right then and there, and you might have to go to court or some magistrate or something to say, hey, my social media wasn't that serious, and then a real human being would look at it and maybe ask some questions or call for an evaluation or something like that, and the evaluator would say, oh yeah, that was a joke or some stupid thing he did 6 years ago or whatever, or not, or say, oh, I don't know, this stuff is pretty strange, and he would be able to evaluate it. So it wouldn't be a computer making any decision other than a delay to take a look at it. So that's what would happen. So but I know it would be melodramatic. Oh my God, Big Brother. I mean, that's where we are with it. But that's again, that's what the red flag. Now, I'm not exactly certain how the red flag elements of this law that was just passed work. It does allow judges to be able to look at it for people who are, I think, is it under 21, not 25, right? 21.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, yeah, it's correct. 21. Yeah, and to be able to look and see, well, maybe he shouldn't get it. And I'm not sure how the mechanics of it work, but there was a lot of concern about that, and there was opposition to it. I mean, the very right wing of Congress voted against it, and hands down, and we're very upset with the mainstream Republican Party for passing it. So, we have that. And then we have the Supreme Court that might strike it down anyway, because they just see any infringement as they look at it shall not be infringed, and they don't regard. I mean, the Second Amendment is one sentence with a dependent clause: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of a people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. All right, now if you look into law, every word is presumed to have meaning and effect. So you cannot hold that first clause to be irrelevant. In other words, if they didn't intend that well-regulated militia to have zero impact, then they would have just put in there the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's the only right that's in the Bill of Rights that has some type of qualifier in it. We don't have, intelligent debate and the spreading of information being essential to a democracy. The freedom of the press shall not be blah, blah, blah. You just have the freedom of press shall not be done. This was obviously very specific. It was a debate at the time, and there were gun control laws in place. In Pennsylvania, you had to take a loyalty oath before you could own a gun. I mean, it wasn't like there was no such thing as gun control. So it was at that time we didn't have AR-15s or anything like that, or probably they would have put a lot more thought into this thing. Anyway, Dave, go ahead.
So a couple things here. So firstly, I kind of gave the background on this person because I think it's important to look at that bill that the Senate just passed. The congressional action. I'm sorry that it's become law now.
Well, I think Biden has yet to sign it, but it will be law.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
It was, it's something that got some bipartisan support. Even Mitch McConnell signed on his side.
Yes.
So it's not like it's some fringe thing. Um, I conflated when you asked me that question. There are two separate things. One element is the enhanced background checks for 18 to 21. I think
Right.
that was in response to Uvalde because it's a school, and we're saying,
Mhm.
hey, these young people that are just getting out of school, like you can't even drink alcohol until you're 21. We got to give some more scrutiny. We can't have 18-year-olds going to shoot up their school. So I think that the enhanced background checks on young people, that has to do with the juvenile record that may have happened prior to them being 18 to 21. That's why that was focused on that. Red flag laws, they're incentives. So there's money available for states to enact a red flag law, and that's going to be 50 different versions of this thing. And so one side of a red flag law that I think is important is if your family gets together and says, hey, I've got a family member that's in crisis and they're telling me they're going to do X, Y, and Z, then you can get law enforcement and judicial help to sort of deal with a mental health crisis within your own family. It's a little bit different, I think, when you're saying, hey, by the way, we need social media to do X, Y, and Z. I think that's a more complicated conversation for another day. The other three pieces of this: federal ban on domestic abusers, strengthening law enforcement for straw purchases and trafficking, and then more funding for mental health programs and school security. I think all three of those are bipartisan in nature. So there is some progress after 30 years
Right.
here, but the Supreme Court, you and I are going to revisit this another time. The Supreme Court is going to be, problematic at state level regulation.
They may not care that this is bipartisan. They may kill this bill and
Right.
this law. So anyway, another time.
On a bright school morning, Alyssa went out to greet the day. Tossed her soccer bag in the back seat of the car, thinking about the game she would play. Now we see her picture in the paper, and her big brown eyes seem to say, you've got blood on your hands. You just stand by while children die. You've got blood on your hands. Money means more to you than living people do. Blood on your hands.
Okay, obviously, possibly the biggest issue, at least so far, of this election is the economy. Obviously, we're talking about inflation. All the other indications of the economy up until now have been good. Great jobs reports coming out, growth and all of that. That's starting to be impacted because the Federal Reserve is upping the interest rates, and we're talking about inflation. And of course, we're talking about the potential of a recession. Of course, the technical definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. And the question is whether or not it will have a huge noticeable impact on jobs. And as we talked about in a previous there are economists who believe in functional unemployment and some economists who advocate functional, like, mass unemployment, and the rest. I mean, I think there are other ways to do it. I think actually, if you really wanted to pull money out of the economy, how about like a temporary tax break for paying off debt? That would do it. People can pay off their consumer debt, pay off their, loans and the rest. I mean, but nobody thinks about that. Nobody thinks that way. And of course, banks and credit card companies would probably object because they wouldn't make as much money. But that would be helpful for inflation more than unemployment. Anyway, we're looking at this. We are probably, I believe, we're waiting on inflation. Information will come towards the middle of the month about June. We're waiting on the jobs report this Friday, but there are some economists who are worrying if it's going to be another real gangbuster of a jobs report in excess of 500,000 jobs, that it could actually be bad for the economy and bad for the Democrats, or bad for Biden anyways, because that will lead the Fed to keep pumping up the interest rates and maybe overreact and create a real serious recession. But if the jobs report are jobs growth are low, or God forbid negative, that would show that the economy is anemic, and therefore, failing on that level as well. The sweet spot apparently would be between 2 and 300,000 jobs. That would be the most optimal situation, where we're continuing to have growth, but not such that it's inflationary. There is good news. The price of gas has been dropping of something like a quarter over the past month, partly because people are finally not driving as much. They're not going for the long road trips. I mean, it's summer now. It's like very unusual for price of gas to be dropping this time of year. This is peak demand. But it is dropping also because things are happening, because in anticipation of potential recession, some companies are pulling back on in a possible anticipation of that. Other things are happening too. There's a real weird thing going on where Iran is sending cheap oil to China to compete with Russia, and we're actually going to sanction people for that. I'm like, Biden, don't sanction them. I mean, if that leads to a price war in oil, that'd be a great thing for us. But he wants to make he thinks he can make some sort of deal with Saudis and other oil makers. I'm just really disappointed in that. So I'm going to toss it to you in just a minute, but we've got this economy. We don't know where it's going to go. Probably it's not going to be over 8% by November. It'll probably be below 5%. It will not be down to 2% by then. But there'll be other economic problems by then that add to the woes? And will it affect other races? We discussed last week, you weren't here, but we discussed the fact that polls for the Senate races are showing that the Democrats are ahead in a bunch of races, but in the exact same polling samples, Biden is like in the low 30s, but the Democrats are ahead in those same polls in Pennsylvania, Georgia. So it may not even affect the Senate races, but for some reason it's affecting House races. There's a Rhode Island, the 2nd district, where all of a sudden, for the first time in a long time, a Republican might win. I don't know why Biden's low approval ratings would affect House races and not Senate races. Maybe somebody can explain that to me. But I'm going to hand it over to you. We can talk about the economy, where you think the economy is going to go, and how it's going to affect November.
Yeah, I was looking at this the other day, trying to kind of get a sense of the best angle of approach here, because what we're talking about is you referred in our preliminary conversation back to the quote from the Ragin' Cajun during the Bill Clinton administration. What's his name again? The Ragin' Cajun.
James Carville.
James Carville, right. So when Bill Clinton was running for president, they on the wall they put, "It's the economy, stupid," just to remind him that that's really what inspires people the most, so they could be focused. And so the question is, now that it's July, after the 4th of July weekend, we have another maybe 8 weeks or so max before people really start getting bombarded with the advertising for what's going to come down the pipeline in November for the election. So what are people gonna be thinking about between now and then? So I looked up a Brookings Institute article that I remembered seeing back in January, and it was called "Inflation Politics is Clearer Than Inflation Economics." So I think it's really poignant here. Again, the history isn't necessarily a guide to the future, but the takeaway line, that just to boil it down so you understand why I'm even mentioning this, the quote is, "Economists have been arguing about whether it's a transitory problem or a structural problem, with some economists going so far as to distinguish between good inflation and bad inflation. But political scientists think about inflation as it impacts the American voter, and in that respect, the problem is much clearer." And it goes on to say how if you make under 50,000, depending on the surveys and the studies, there's a bunch of science behind this, but and survey research, so if you make under $50,000 a year, half of the people, which that represents, that's approximately the median income. The median household income is a little higher than that. I think it's like 65,000 or so. So it's not quite half of the households in the country. Call it 70 million households maybe. This is what the truth for them is, that they are saying in survey research that the increased inflation is severe for them. It's either severely or moderately impacting their lives. And then when you get to people that are like over, I think the word is a severe hardship or a moderate hardship. That's the Gallup poll language. Now, people that make over $100,000 in a household, which is like, two professional incomes, to $25 an hour incomes full time, only 2% say it's a problem. So it's a tale of two cities. And you've got the media bubble, so to speak, who mainstream corporate media, who to a certain extent either is going to hype the horse race aspect of it or not really be fully in tune to how much pain is being experienced around the country. So fast forward to what is the impact politically. One of the estimates, because when you do polling, exit polling from an election, you don't ask people how much they make, but you do ask them what their income is. So income and race are asked. So when they control by race and income, depending on the state, so if you look at Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Texas, these are all states where it's they're just showing a footprint of the different political momentum that could affect the Senate outcome. And the sort of non-college educated white folks make up huge portions of the population, while Black folks and Hispanic folks don't make up a significant portion of the population. So that's really the rub, is that when you have, are there so many poor white people that Democrats have a chance, basically? Because in theory, and this is a rough approximation across all kinds of different surveys, but in general, the answer is that there are going to be more people impacted by inflation, that it's a bad sign for the incumbents. So the takeaway was that, they look back to the Jimmy Carter administration, how he was not able to get reelected. And so they're saying that the key takeaway is President Biden must be seen as working really hard on inflation, doing everything possible, or else his political party is going to take a hit this year and he will take a hit in 2 years. Bringing down the rate of inflation will have this is what the article says, will have a significant impact on the presidential election, but the president is going to have to be really lucky for something to change soon enough and quick enough to impact the midterms, which in economics, you don't want to rely on luck, which that's a bad indicator for Democrats to have control in Congress.
Well, I just picked up a headline that's about an hour and a half old. U.S. on the cusp of falling gas prices. I mean, it's falling. Not because of a big major change in supply, although we have upped what we're pulling, but because of fears, because demand has gone down, as we spoke about, but because of fears of recession. And which is kind of interesting, not just because of people, but because of companies, scaling back, and China scaling back, and the rest. Maybe the fear of recession will actually prevent the recession in the long run. I mean, he won't lose on the fear of recession, and you might start to see all of a sudden Republicans say, "Well, Biden isn't responsible for the drop in inflation, the drop of gas, but that's too bad. You don't, not only does Biden not get, unfortunately he gets blamed for inflation, but he also gets credit for it, but he's got to take the credit for it. He's got to get out there and do the Trump thing and say, yeah, that's me. He's got to do it. He's going to have to do that if this happens, but it is dropping. They're expecting, somebody here is projecting 40 to 60 cent drop over the next couple of months, possibly even sooner. So that's if that happens. I mean, we're still in August, right? But then once we get to September, it's in the fall. It falls. So it may be lucky, but that might be what happens. And then once that happens, once the economy eases up a bit, it doesn't have to totally resolve. It just has to back off from this complete, all of my money, is going out the window to pay for these things and for food. Then all of a sudden, yeah, what about this Roe thing? Then all of a sudden that does it. And on top of it, there's a poll that came out within the past week that showed that young women are taking a bigger interest in politics right now, and we'll see if they start registering in higher numbers. That could be a sleeping giant awakening that nobody's even discussing. And that depends on how well the Democrats organize.
So that you've now brought a couple other topics on top of the one we're talking about, which I think it's fine because I think we're being predictive here. But one takeaway, just to bring it back to the economy, one thing I didn't mention earlier is that the article pointed out that Democrats' enthusiasm for expanding, and I'm quoting, for expanding social programs blinds them to the concerns of the large numbers of families who don't want and may not benefit from social programs, but who live from paycheck to paycheck and worry about paying their bills. So that's not neither here nor there, other than to say that when people worry, whether it's based on reality or current reality or projected anticipation, they're going to basically hold the party in power to account, and they want to make sure that there's something that's being done here. It's not just did the prices go down; it's what did they do?
Well, he did pour gasoline into the economy. We know that from the reserves. He needs to point that out. He needs to say, "That's what I did." See, and now it's happening, even if it's not what actually caused it. He needs to point that out. The Democrats need to go out and say, that's what he did, and this is what happened. He needs to point out that, he's been, point out the effects of the war, of the impact on Russia, whatever. He needs to sell that he's done things, and this is what's happening, even if it's not the case.
So
he's got to do it.
And I agree with you that's, I would love to hear a clear message about exhibiting leadership and about a vision and about a strategy and all of those things. We're not getting a ton of that, unfortunately, to date. But I'll point out this other piece of it too, is that there is economic uncertainty out there in the sense that it's not clear exactly if we are going to see a peace settlement in Ukraine, for example, that's going to restore some normalcy to oil markets, and that's going to impact food prices around the world, which impacts our domestic. And those are some of the big macro issues. But you and I have talked about oil and gasoline before. It's to his credit, even though it's not being well received, the administration, the president, and others representing them, they are pointing out that gas prices are that a major component of gas prices are the fear and greed of speculation based on macro events and not the economic decisions necessarily about supply and demand that you would expect, that you were taught in school about how supply and demand works. That's one piece of it. Another piece of it is he is shaming the oil industry to a certain extent by saying, like, hey, you guys cut capacity, refining capacity for COVID when the economy tanked, right when COVID first hit, but now you're not expanding that capacity. And so there's two competing narratives here, which is they could, in theory, they could reopen or expand to refine again to the amounts that we were at before the COVID basic collapse and then now recovery in the economy. They could sort of match. There could be a way, but the oil industry right now, and not to disparage them, but they're in this. They got the long game going on, and they're being told, number one, hey, you guys just didn't. You're being told that we're going to transition to a green economy and that we're going to ban gasoline production cars. Yeah. Some country, Europe is like there are some companies in Europe like Stellantis, which like Jeep and Chrysler, Fiat, Alfa Romeo. That's a huge global company. They're decided they're going to stop making gas cars like within 4 years.
Yeah.
But then here in the United States, 2030, 8 years. Yeah. So there is this divergence a little bit here going on about like, are we going to actually adequately fund a transition to a green economy or not? It's obviously not a particularly good time to do it with respect to inflation, because anytime the government has spent money in the recent past on, say, COVID, stimulus or preventing a collapse during COVID, they did create trillions of dollars, and there's speculation about how awful that is. But that money could be utilized effectively towards a green transition if there were leadership on this. But right now, not so much.
Well, that's not and that's not going to be resolved before November. But we'll see. I find it questionable that the economy is going to decide November's election. But we will talk about this in the coming weeks.
Well, but let me ask it the other way then. If you're a corporation that has eaten up most of the competition and cornered the market, is it easier for you to raise prices on your customers and maximize your profits because you don't have to worry about losing your business? In other words, you've lost the discipline that the market imposes.
In principle, if you don't have competition and you're a monopolist, yes, you can raise your prices.
Okay, and over the past year, we know that prices have risen because of supply chain problems, unexpected shifts in the demand for goods, and even higher labor costs. But if corporations were simply passing along these costs in highly competitive markets, would the company's profit margins have changed much?
You know, so many things affect those that calculation. In principle, you could be right, but
well, it's very much not what we're seeing.
Okay, we're trying sort of a new topic tonight, political potpourri. And I actually stole that from the McLaughlin Group, an old, pundit show on PBS. I think we're going to start a little bit talking about what's going on and update with the drama of the January 6th committee. Of course, we all heard the story about the battle of the limo and the fight between the president and the Secret Service officers. Of course, she testified to what she was being told. Maybe physically that wasn't possible. Apparently, the Secret Service agents, the two of them, Ornato and Engel, want to come and contradict her. But now apparently their Metropolitan Police said, well, they told me that story too. So the question is even if the story isn't true, maybe this guy wanted to impress an attractive young woman and told the story. We don't know. All we know is that she said this under oath and put her career and life at risk. And this guy is a complete trumper, by the way, and wants to come and contradict. And apparently there's a little bit of discussion as to whether or not these Secret Service agents want to do it under oath or whether their lawyer wants them to do it under oath. And I'm like, what's with that? I mean, it's just there's a lot of discussions going on. Meanwhile, well, why don't we start with that, Dave?
Sure.
There.
So I'm going to work backwards just because I'm going to cue your lead here, follow up on your lead. There's an institutional issue here too. So a lot of the coverage has had to do with, is it physically possible? Was it hearsay? Does it matter? Are they going to testify? I'd like to go to a more core issue, which is the fact that the Secret Service is a very private and insular organization. Now they have a spokesperson. They did go give a statement. Several of the members have given statements to the committee, to the January 6th committee. But as an institution, their primary function is to stay out of the headlines, stay out of the news. Not let it be known that there's some palace intrigue that happened where Mike Pence's head of his security detail was talking to President Trump's deputy chief of staff, who was a former Secret Service member that Trump brought into his inner circle because he's loyalist and knowledgeable with connections, etc. These are two very high-ranking people and so Pence's lead said, if Pence gets in that car, you guys will take him to Alaska. So they know there's some once they agree to go on the record and testify, then there's the issue of it gets ugly and nobody wants to see how the sausage is made. This is Secret Service. It's literally called the Secret Service. So there's that. So the question is, are they going to testify publicly on the record? It's possible. I doubt it'll be public. I think it's going to be behind closed doors. They're going to give a statement to frame the issue. And then the question is, this guy Tony, is he going to cop to telling Cassie what she said he said? And in theory, he might. But this could be like September 11th committee where there are huge sections of reality that people will never know about and never talk about. But they will frame it in a way where it doesn't really matter so much if Trump grabbed the wheel or not, or if he tried to choke this guy or not. Those things don't really affect the reality.
That was actually not even the most important part of the testimony. The more important part was that Trump wanted them to let people in with the weapons.
Exactly.
That was
exactly.
So anyway, I mean, all right. So we've this has been kind of discussed, but we've got other topics that we want to get to as well. What was one of the other things? What do you want to go to, Dave? We've got a selection of them. What was next on your?
So I'm gonna go with the list as it is, and because this one maybe we'll do a little bit less detail. Yeah, Representative Kinzinger's post. I know that you shared with me the link of the messages received by his staffers, and it was I don't know, almost 4 minutes of awful hate. And as Bill Cosby would say, flim, flour, and phlegm, just tons of curses and we're going to do these awful things to you people, your enemies, etc. And this is about Representative Kinzinger and his staff who are trying to just do their job. And so I don't know where you wanted to go. And
let's remember that these staffers are actually high school students and college students there to learn about how the legislature works, and they're subjected to this.
And some of it is, we know where you live and we're going to come get you. Yeah. And so that's witness. I mean, these aren't witnesses, but that's, you can't make terroristic threats to people like that. It's especially to a congressional office. I suspect that if, I don't even want to say this awful thing that popped into mind. If the wrong person made the wrong call, there'd be people at their door in less than 24 hours. That's all I'm going to say. So this is just part of the tapestry of atrocities, I would say, that we are going to be exposed to as we process how to deal with January 6th fallout.
Kinzinger, of course, is one of the two Republicans on the committee. He's not running for re-election, partly because the redistricting in Illinois makes it almost impossible for him to win. It's his district has been split up, and so there's just no way where he lives is going to be primarily Democratic. But it's amazing. It's amazing the hatred, just the raw hatred that is in this, and it's always been that way. There've always been somewhat crazies, but it just seems to be more mainstream now, more acceptable. That this happened without repercussions, without social repercussions. It's just they're allowed to do this, and I don't know. I mean, there's just no embarrassment about it. Well, let's move on. There's the Trafalgar is a Republican polling company. They are rated pretty high, but they do what Rasmussen does. They have polls that are favor the Republicans for the longest period of time, and then all of a sudden, at the last possible minute, they magically conform to the rest of the polls, so they get good ratings on 538 because they come closer at the end. But they're always, firing up the base with great results. Well, they have a poll that in North Carolina has Beasley within 3 points of Budd. North Carolina is not supposed to be close, folks. I mean, this is again one of those Senate races where Biden's approval ratings are way down. Now, Beasley is a pretty good candidate. She was in a judge, in North Carolina, African American woman, very good, very solid. But all of a sudden in Wisconsin, Ohio, all of a sudden you've got these things. The Republicans have done the Democrats some favors. They put up some really bad candidates in states where Democrats have some really good candidates. But what's going on in North Carolina? I mean, and do the Democrats have a chance?
So I'm going to give the short version is that this is it's going to be proxy, where Republican Ted Budd is endorsed by Trump, and North Carolina Republican Party is strong and probably you would think favored. But
and he's not an Oz or a Vance, by the way. He actually is a good candidate.
Right. So when we see it this close, I would say, and I'm paraphrasing some political scientists, but you'd really want to see Democrats ahead to assume that it's tied. Basically, that's a shortcut way of looking at it, because when you start to factor in likely voters versus some, there's the passion that you can't really control for when your survey only considers likely voters, et cetera. But so there's an outlier to keep in mind here, though, and that is the Green Party. So the Green Party in North Carolina has got enough petitions to get on the ballot, and they may end up being a wild card they're left leaning, and they may siphon off enough votes to be a spoiler here.
Sure.
So that's something that I think people should keep an eye on. I'm not going to get too far off on that, but it's possible.
But the point is weeks ago, North Carolina, nobody was even considering that the Democrats could win. This is a Republican poll that has them within the margin of error. So, the question is whether or not the Democrats they should even consider this. Should they invest money in this?
Oh, definitely.
That is a big thing. All of a sudden now they could possibly win in Wisconsin. They're ahead there. They could possibly. It looks like they're winning in Georgia. Herschel Walker is just turning out to be a god awful candidate for the Republicans. Vance. He'll probably win, but only because Ohio is just beat red these days, and Murphy is a Sherrod Brown kind of candidate and kind of more conservative than Brown. He could pull that out if things go well. This is supposed to be a good year for Republicans, not just because of the economy, but it's the first midterm election after the presidential election. All the reasons that the Republicans are supposed to win, and yet they because of Trump partly and other reasons, they chose to nominate some bad candidates.
And in theory, the January 6th committee may actually, crack that some of those traditional Republicans and say, do I really want to continue for it to go this way or not? And we'll see.
All right. Last week, I made a prediction that Gretchen Whitmer of the governor of Michigan is going to be one of the presidential candidates and possibly the front runner in 2024, assuming Biden doesn't run. But of course, Gavin Newsom is also in that race, and he is making a play for it. And right now, he's already poking at DeSantis, who he presumes is going to be his toughest opponent. Even assuming that Trump doesn't run, or assuming even if Trump does run, he's weakened. He's there's blood in the water, and so. He's basically attacking him, and the New Jersey governor likes it. Everybody, the Democrats like the fact that Gavin Newsom is doing this. Why is Gavin Newsom doing this? Other than he's going to run, why Florida? What's he doing? What does he have to gain from this?
So my take on this is there's three key things. One is Gavin Newsom, he won that recall, he won the primary, he's got a full war chest, and he doesn't have a whole lot to spend it on. So there's that piece of it, which is the money's there, and so that leads right to elevating his national profile within the party. Maybe Kamala Harris as vice president would, in theory, be next in line to run, but her popularity, she's one of the few politicians that are less popular than Joe Biden. And, I have nothing personal against her, but I think sort of universally people aren't happy with her style or substance. Yeah, exactly. But so then there's a question of, then California, most of the the largest single presence within the Democratic Party nationally is like 3 states, of which California is the biggest. So our leader here, our governor, is probably in queue. We got the Secretary of Housing, HHS, and we've got Becerra. And so there are a few people that are in the administration. There's sort of a natural piece of this, but let's talk about the juicy part. Why DeSantis and why now? Because DeSantis is rising very quickly above and past Trump. There's whispers. There's more than whispers. There's polling. DeSantis is beginning to kind of not just be neck and neck with Trump, but he's actually posing a real legitimate threat to national popularity. So then it's a question of, people talked about this comparison between California and Texas, but really DeSantis is doing a better job than Abbott. In Texas, there's some extremes that don't translate well nationally. DeSantis, on the other hand, his policies are really popular nationally with Republicans. So it really is an elevated national competition.
Abbott conceivably might not even survive November's gubernatorial election down there. So, he probably will, but he may not.
And another element of this, which I would say is not that it's proxy for any significant portion of the voting population, but Joe Rogan. So the Joe Rogan, what do you call it? A litmus test. Joe Rogan has said, "Hey, DeSantis, it speaks to me. Like he's got he's got common sense, problem solving." I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is that DeSantis really is not just hitting home with Joe Rogan personally, but with that sort of newish way of looking at the party. Mind you, Joe Rogan supported Bernie Sanders. He endorsed Bernie Sanders.
But Rogan's all over the place.
Exactly. So my follow up on that is that Joe Rogan, I think it is even today. I mean, the days just blur together. But he said he's not going to have Trump on his show, and he had the opportunity to have Trump on his show, but he just won't because he doesn't want to elevate him or support him or encourage him or give him more traction. So that's going to give a lot of the people that are sort of on the periphery of the political process a pause to consider, to open the door to think about DeSantis as opposed to the status quo sort of tractor beam of Trump.
Now, there's several other Republican figures also that want to get into the game as well. So we'll see what happens with them. But I would think if Trump does not run, or if he goes down in flames, which he may, it will be DeSantis. He will be the standard bearer. He's really popular, unless things go really bad. I mean, I actually think that this whole Disney World thing is eventually going to blow up in his face. But as to whether or not it's politically fatal, I don't know. But it's going to take some of the luster out of it. It's going to cause them some real problems. Bonds in Florida are already dropping because it's showing that Florida welches on their deals, right? So it's just anyway. We have to, we're going to have to come back to all of that. But Gavin Newsom running for president.
Yep. You heard it here first.
Okay, Dave, what do you have for us by way of prediction?
So my prediction is a consequence of the testimony last week on Thursday, the January 6th committee, Cassidy Hutchinson's blockbuster testimony. One of the things that she said, and that it was revealed in the presentation, was that various aides testified there was a desire by the president to accompany rally attendees to the Capitol, and that White House counsel Pat Cipollone warned Cassidy to prevent Trump from traveling to the Capitol due to criminal exposure, and that meant obstructing justice or defrauding the electoral count or inciting a riot. But the truth is that it wasn't clear. The point was that they were very worried about criminal liability, and Pat Cipollone has agreed that he will testify on the record with the committee. So that's going to really, I think, solidify for posterity, for history. Is there an actual crime? And once I think that there's some corroboration, some high-level corroboration, as this goes forward, we will see crimes. I think we will see the Department of Justice put together a package of criminal liability with the intention of preventing Trump from running for president, or at least diminishing his stature to the point where he's figuratively pushed out of the box. So my prediction is we will see crimes, and we'll see them before November.
Interesting. All right. Well, my prediction is going to be about predictions. Cook's report right now has the Republicans with a 51% chance of taking the Senate chamber. The right now 538 has the Democrats with 47%, Republicans with 53% chance of winning that. 2 days ago, the Democrats were it was 55-45. I actually think that if if the economic news stays good, now, of course, it could be catastrophes and all that kind of stuff. If the economic news gets a little bit better and things keep trending the way they are, I believe that both Cooks and 538 will reverse themselves within the next 3 weeks. By the end of July, and that Democrats will be slightly favored to win, and that we will see turnarounds in places that could have been unthinkable. Not North Carolina necessarily, but possibly Ohio and Nevada and maybe even Wisconsin. You heard it here first.
All right, that's a good one. This is juicy. Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, that brings it up. We'll be back next week. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.